everyone, and welcome to another Scots Whay podcast. And today I'm joined by Chris Thomson, the founder and frontman of the Bathers. Hello, Chris.
Good evening, Alistair. Nice to see you.
And nice to see you too. So for people that don't know, the Bathers, I would say not just a Glasgow band, but arguably the Glasgow band. We'll talk a bit more about the kind of importance of the city and your music perhaps later. But we're initially going to talk about the Marina Trilogy, which has just been remastered and re-released on vinyl and other formats as well. So can you tell us a little bit about those three albums?
Obviously they originally came out in the mid to late 90s on Marina, and they've been out of print for a long time. And the more I've got back into working and building up my own sort of studio here, and the vinyl renaissance has been taking place, I thought it'd be fantastic to get these albums back out. I think they stand up. And the more I looked at what we had in the way of the master tapes and various mixes and versions, I decided I wanted to do a few tweaks and what have you, and as you do. And so I think particularly in the case of Kelvingrove Baby, I discovered that the original album had been recorded on the ADAT format, and the tapes in the intervening years had not been stored well. They were damp got to them basically. So kind of turning that to my advantage, I just decided to work with whatever mixes I could find or various versions I had here. And then I did a few new vocals and things. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, and I can't even be sure when I listen to it myself now what I did when, if you know what I mean. It was just, the important thing was to serve the set of songs as best I could. There were certain things about the original albums I didn't think were as good as they could be. You know, is it that type of that once that process took hold, what might have taken me a week or two, of course, took me months probably per album. But it was great fun to sort of, as close as I'm going to get, I think, to get in a wee time machine, going back to being my 30-something self or whatever it was, been re-inhabit those songs and perform them. I mean, I really loved where I did replace a vocal. I mean, an example that would come to mind is Venice Shoes, say, at the opening track of Lagoon Blues. I don't think the casual listener would necessarily say, hang on, that wasn't done back in the early 90s. I was kind of, it's me, and I was amazed at how comfortable it felt to be back. I think arguably giving a slightly enhanced performance of the songs. It was really great fun, and as these things tend to do, it absorbed an immense amount of time, which in the most lovely way. So that what led us to. So go ahead, Alistair.
Well, I was just going to say, I hadn't thought about it being a kind of almost time capsule for you, going back and revisiting these songs. How did you feel about doing that?
Well, it's wonderful. It's kind of like getting a bit of a second bite of the cherry. I mean, whatever audience they had, it's definitely on the cultish sort of side of things. And they were never mainstream huge records, not as if hundreds of thousands of people owned them. So it was a chance to kind of, as I say, enhance them and make them the very best that I felt they could be. Because I always felt the songs were very, very strong. I think I've managed to keep a lot of individual performances were there that have been kept. So kept the best of the lot, and just enhanced, just adding mainly my own vocals. There was a couple of tracks. Again, Kelvingrove Baby as an album, probably more on there, has been changed than any other because of the damage to the tapes. But on I think a couple of tracks on that, I brought in a slightly bigger string section on the Fragrance Remains Insane. We worked with the strings in the Glasgow City Halls, which is just a lovely room, and that just kind of, it was added in with some of the original elements and just seemed to take it to yet another level. A song I'd always loved and very fond of it. But it's kind of, hopefully, I've had one or two people who loved it 25 years ago or something. Oh, you've changed this, but very few. I'm happy to say most people just, like it just as much, or it seems to be getting a new set of listeners as well, which is always part of the idea behind it.
Were they ever released on vinyl in the 90s?
No, they weren't at all. You know, as when you look back, those strange times, weren't they, where vinyl was seen as the dinosaur, the absolute, you know, was on its. And I think that funny. I mean, I can think of a lot of our releases. I think the Sweet Deceit, the second Bathers album, was the last one released on vinyl, and the very first Bathers album was at the cusp of where CD wasn't quite established enough. In fact, it was released on vinyl and cassette, but no CD. So there's these kind of bizarre things that you can chart the ebb and flow of the various formats. But yeah, vinyl was regarded as, you know, absolutely, you know, a completely irrelevant format. So it's a fantastic thing that it's back, because it does make just such a lovely artifact. You know, I think it's more special. I know I like going to place the record down, all that sort of stuff. It's more meaningful than engaging with about roughly 20 minutes per side. It's a great thing.
Because I was thinking, if ever albums were perfect to be put out on vinyl, it is these three albums, because it's not just the songs themselves, but the way that they look, photography. I mean, it was always of a very high standard with the Bathers. And so to get it, you know, almost like big size, you know, that rather than just on a CD seems the right thing.
It really, to do justice to the fantastic artwork that Stefan at Marina Records put together, it's just beautiful to see it, you know, really well printed, and the full LP size was absolutely fantastic, and really a real thrill. I mean, that's another element of the reevaluating, rejigging the records was, of course, I think Lagoon Blues ran to as close to 70 minutes, which was the downside of the CD era, where you could, so you did. And I think actually the albums are better for being streamlined towards the vinyl. I was trying to desperately to get down to the 20 minutes or less, you know, Lynn record style, but that was impossible. So it was fine. I think roughly 22 minutes aside, and you know, the mastering engineers have done a great job to make it sound good on vinyl at that length. It's
true. I think that was one of the downsides of CD. It was like, well, you can get this to between 70 and 90 minutes, so let's do it. And it didn't always help.
Sometimes it got a bit excessive at times.
So for people that don't know, the three albums are Lagoon Blues, Sunpowder, and Kelvingrove Baby, and together we're calling it the Marina Trilogy. And Marina Records, they were really important in my life because I bought so many of her things, but some people won't know about Marina, and they're not their normal record label, if there is such a thing.
That's very true. I mean, I first met Stefan and Frank. They are and still are active as journalists, and Stefan design as well. But they came to London to interview a band I was in at the time called Bloomsday, and these two German guys turned up at the Island Records HQ, and they were sort of, they were quite excited with the Bloomsday thing, but really what they wanted to talk to me about was Friends Again, my previous band. They'd been big fans, and we kind of hit it off then, and then maybe a year or two down the line, I think they just said, look, we're thinking of starting this label. I said, oh, that's interesting. I'm working on this album called Lagoon Blues. I'm, pretty much, would you like to hear it? And they were like, absolutely. And it just very quickly snowballed from there. And they, as you know, they got involved with a lot of Scottish acts, which has been fantastic. So there's a really great relationship between Hamburg, where they're based, and the Scottish scene.
Yeah, so you were the kind of initial link, because I often wondered where that connection was made between these guys from Germany, and particularly, it seemed to me, a lot of Glasgow musicians, but Scottish musicians in general.
I'm not sure how some of I think that must have been one of the very first connections. I mean, I know I think Lagoon Blues was the very second release on the label. There was a release by a band called Gazelle. So there must have been another connection going on that I'm not particularly aware of. But yeah, we were pretty much in there. And then people like Davy Scott with the Pearlfishers came on board very quickly. Douglas McIntyre's bands, Sugartown and Cowboy Mouth, all sorts of things had great releases on the label.
Yeah,
So it had seemed to happen very quickly. There was a lot of stuff coming out. It was
and
brilliant.
often a lot of Scottish musicians who had been, like a couple of the guys from Orange Juice, I think Roddy Frame had an album out with them as well.
I think
It's
he did,
worth,
yeah.
for people who don't know, it's worth checking out Marina Records, just looking at the back catalogue. It's
It's a phenomenal amount of stuff. Yeah, James Kirk, as you say, the Orange Juice connection. Yeah, phenomenal back catalogue. And it seemed, you're probably aware that they were talking about calling it a day. A couple of years ago, there was a sort of 25-year farewell concert as part of Celtic Connections.
Yeah,
that was supposed to be the swan song, but I think they've got a new lease of life, and they feel it's still worth. It's very tough, as we all know, it's tough for all sorts of independent businesses. But I'm so glad that they've decided to stick in there. In fact, I think they've got a lovely compilation coming out in bed with Marina, which features many of the bands that we're talking about here. That's been coming out in vinyl for the first time for Record Store Day. I guess that'll be, is it next spring or something, the next one? But yeah, so it's brilliant. They're sort of back in the saddle, and very, the Marina Trilogy. I think what happened there was, I think initially spoke to Stefan and said, look, I'm working on the multi-tracks. I'm going to do the digital platform stuff, but I would love to put it on vinyl. How would you feel about me using the artwork? He said, that's absolutely fantastic, on one condition: I must do it. I don't want anyone else messing it up, shall we say, is another word to use. But I said, well, absolutely. And then about an hour later, another email came back saying, you know what, these have got to be out on Marina. I was like, yeah, let's do it. Brilliant. So the Marina Trilogy was born from the 3 albums. And we did talk about, should we do them a staggered release, but the closer it, obviously with this year being so strange with the COVID situation, things did get pushed back a bit, but we realized that, it just felt right to put them out together, and make them available at once. And so far so good, and the reception has been really lovely.
Well, there's a couple of things there. One, looking at the reviews, it's not just people going, remember these records from when we were younger, and going like, they seem to be really being looked at afresh, which is great. Which is deserved. It
is great. I mean, I always hoped I wasn't kidding myself with the classic. You feel like you want to make something that's got a bit of staying power, the timeless thing. But yeah, I do detect that. I think people are just, they feel, oh, that feels, it does feel fresh, and I think it because we weren't part of any particular fashion, or I've always inclined to just try and do my own thing. I've not been particularly commercially minded, and to say the least. But yeah, it stands. I think it stands up. It stands up, which is great.
But the other thing is that Bathers fans, and I include myself in that, do seem to be very, very loyal. And if you're a Bathers fan, you want everything. I can imagine people going, well, let's just get them all. Let's just get as many as we can, because I think it's one of these bands that, as you say, you maybe weren't hugely commercially successful, but they're one of the bands that I talk to people and they are into the Bathers as well. It's almost like, oh yeah, okay, you're all right.
Yeah,
you're one of us.
Well, yeah, no, that's lovely. What struck me, I often with my friend Paul McGeekin, we were in Friends Day together as a school band, which got signed, did a record and all the rest of it. Similar thing happened there, where many years later, people keep emerging, say, oh yeah, Friends Day, and you sort of, decades later, you realize, actually, we were probably closer to actually breaking through and becoming something that we had the remotest idea of at the time, which is lovely. So I kind of hang on to that thought, that it doesn't really matter, if it's 50 people at a gig or a couple of emails being positive, you just don't know what's hidden out there. And I think you're seeing some of that coming down the tracks just now, that, there's a lot of lovely sentiment coming through, really positive stuff. So yeah, it's a good one.
And you spoke about the Stefan wanting to make sure that the pictures and the images and the photography was as it should be. But it does seem to me that as a band, you always had a very strong image in terms of covers, your style. Was that something that was important?
Yeah, very much so. I remember the first one, it's become a bit of a museum piece, actually, where in the first album cover, it's a very different Glasgow. I mean, that's Time Machine stuff as well. When I think of wandering about Glasgow Green, just me and the photographer, Joe Pelosi, and at that point, the Dilton Fountain, which now has been wonderfully restored,
Yeah,
4.5 million quid later, but it would literally, you know, I think there was about 2 out of the dozens of statues in any way intact. So I was able to climb right into the Dilton Fountain, get quite a striking shot. And you know, it just feels like a sort of bit of a lost Glasgow moment there, because it was a very, very different city, but they were definitely striving to try and do something with that certain aesthetic depth and character to it. And then with Sweet Deceit, the cover, I think I remember saying to the art director, the Glasgow boys painting wise were really breaking out.
Yeah.
And I remember saying, oh, I quite like this guy Stephen Conroy. Maybe we could get him to paint a cover. And the art director, the art guy, I think he made a call and was duly told to get lost. But then they quite happily they got a painter in Ashley Pearce, I think was his name, who did a great bit of cover art. A sort of quite a strange surrealist painting of me with illustrations from the songs, you know, portrayed in the painting. So yeah, and then from there on into the hands of the collaboration with Stefan and Frank and Marina. So yeah, it's very important to. I think they definitely, let's say the Lagoon Blues front cover, where there is a picture, the picture's taken in Venice, and the songs is kind of evoking in a way an imagined Venice, sort of Venice and Glasgow somehow. It was very, you know, but the cover image just perfectly captured what the music was striving to.
Well, I think it was a very interesting time in Glasgow as well, because you had your music coming through, and as you say, the Glasgow Boys paintings, Stephen Conroy and Howson and Adrian Wyszynski and people like that. It was a very culturally, it was a thriving time, I thought.
Absolutely, yeah. It was a strange cusp where, you know, for those, you know, the 70s are based. I mean, there's these pictures that have a lot of notice recently. The Raymond Depardon, is that pronounced it? I mean, that's the early Glasgow that I remember coming to, when my big cousin Frankie used to meet me and take me to Celtic games. But that was the journey from Central. We quite often just walked out to the game, and some of those pictures, some of the classic picture of the couple in front of the, you know, it looks like a war scene. That great big black tenement, and that's the Glasgow as I first remember it as a young teenager. But the change, I think there was some sort of, you know, aspiration to create a, you know, more of aesthetic, beautiful world, and the Glasgow Boys painting was part of that. I think, you know, you'd have to mention the Blue Nile.
Yeah.
You know, the bathers were trying to, and I just to break the stereotypes of, you know, post-industrial decline, and trying to, Glasgow, there was a resurgence across, you know, many art forms, and to some extent the built environment and all the rest of it as well.
Yeah, because I was thinking about the songs and the lyrics, and what you mentioned Kelvingrove Baby, and you've got Angel and Ruskin, and you mentioned Ashton Lane gets mentions, and but it's Glasgow, for me, it's like Glasgow is a European city first and foremost, rather than, as you say, the kind of post-industrial place that perhaps more people expected. Yeah,
well, it always had that element, and I definitely homed in on it. I think the timing was fortuitous. I moved in from, well, friends again. We, as youngsters, you know, late teens, early 20s, we spent a lot of the time in sort of increasingly sort of crappy guest houses in London and what have you. So by the time I managed to get back and settled in Glasgow, I moved from where I'd grown up, Uddingston, very suburban, nice enough in its way, but, you know, not a city environment at all. I made the classic, you know, sort of suburban pop stars, but we came in and I lived in Finniston. It was just exactly the right sort of part of town, because it had both elements of Glasgow, really. I loved the crane, which I could see from my window, which now I'm on the south of the river, I can actually see, but looking almost a mirror image where I stare, the view I looked at for about 15 years, I'm now looking the other way. But it had that gritty, but it had the beauty of Park Circus up on the hill, like a mansion on the hill feel, into the West End, as you say, you know, Ashton Lane, Crown Circus, all. And I did, you know, was quite very susceptible to the sense of place in writing those songs, and particularly maybe from Sweet Deceit. There was a lot of Glasgow referencing in that, because it was just me, I think, discovering that this part of Glasgow, this was feeling sort of at home and very, very excited to be there, be around those beautiful buildings and the whole kind of cultural vibe that was going on.
I saw you play Cottairs Theatre once, and it was one of those occasions where I thought, it's the perfect band in the perfect venue.
Yes, yeah, that's a fantastic space. Yeah. Doesn't seem to get used as much. I don't know about where it is right now, but even prior to this year, but yeah, fantastic space.
And talk a little bit about Friends Again. You mentioned them, because it does seem to me that they are a hugely influential band. Perhaps you didn't realize it at the time, and perhaps, you know, it's only now looking back, but you had yourself and you had the guys who were into Love and Money. But I just think as well, the sound, the kind of indie pop sound, really came to influence a lot of people that came after it. You think that's fair?
Yeah, well, that may be true. It's certainly, I think we were lucky in that we combined a few different strands of musical interest and background in a quite a kooky, dynamic way. I mean, we were essentially, I was a punk with Neil, my pal from school, bassist. We were, you know, suburban punks. Yeah. But that, of course, led you to massive Bowie fans, Iggy, Velvets, everything that was on that side of the equation. Paul, keyboard player, was much more prog rock, Rush, ELP, long hair, Pink Floyd, you know. So, and then James Grant came into the equation, and he was like a fully formed, unbelievably talented young guitarist. When he was 18 or 19, we joined them, and he was just coming out of this. I think he'd been basically sitting in his bedroom for a number of years, absolutely nailing Zepp, you know, everything going. It was all the classics, you know. And when those elements came together, it probably did make something a bit different, you know. And it's good that obviously Cherry Red put out the album plus all sorts of extras last year, and that was just fantastic. But I think they were pretty amazed at how quickly it actually sold out to press some more, and that was extremely heartening. Yeah, that is still being enjoyed.
And how do you go from being a band who kind of you form with school friends or friends about that age to getting signed? I mean, it does seem like still quite was there people in Glasgow? You know, I know Glasgow music at the time was really well thought of, and maybe had a lot of up.
Well, that's a good point, and it's very strange to look back on it. It seemed to happen very, very quickly. But we were fortunate, and one of our friends in our sort of little Bothwell hangout, we were rehearsing. It was one of the pals, a guy called John Quigley, who's now owns successful restaurants and things like that. He said, "I'll manage you," because John always had a fantastic gift of the gab. And again, that was another piece of the equation. He had the sheer effrontery, and he had a big sister in London, and we all piled down to Tufnell Park, hanging out at the Camden Palace. So he would go right up to the Boy Georges and the Steve Daggers and Spandau Ballet Gang, and have you heard? You've got to hear this, friends. And you know, whether it was absolute nonsense or not, but he would come back to us and say, "Yeah, Boy George loves the demo." To this day, we'll never know, but it did create a dynamic. So he had that knack, which I certainly completely lack, of just basically talking your way in through doors and what have you. And so very quickly, I mean, we did benefit from the amount of A&R interest in the city at the time, and I think the postcard scene had massively opened that wide open for the guys a year or so down the line, like us, coming through. So there was this interest. John tapped into it. He got A&R men up off the back of the demos, came to see us at Night Moves, and there was a sort of mini bidding war thing. A couple of A&R men, and we had a few of our girlfriends were strategically placed to scream at just the right moment. So I remember Ashley Goodall, the A&R guy, was, "Oh, there's even screaming girls. It's wonderful. It's the whole package." It's like, yeah, they know us. So they worked, and you know, we very quickly got a publishing deal, and then a record. You know, like, right, 8-album deal. And of course, you don't fully appreciate that it's all subject to the contract being renewed on an album by album basis. But yeah, so we went from being on the dole to getting well, it seemed like a lot of money at the time, and it certainly got us out of jail for a bit with parents saying, well, why have you dropped out of uni? What are you messing about in this outhouse in Bothwell day and night? We did practice very hard. We were sort of night and day. It was great. Again, great. It was a gang hut. We just played and played and played. It was fantastic.
And am I right in saying when you signed for the Bathers, it was a solo deal for yourself, and then is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I landed a bit lucky. Incredibly naively after the Friends Again split. I sort of initially the Phonogram Records, who kept on the Love and Money guys, they said, "Oh no, we're going to keep everyone on. This is no problem." And I think I did my first little set of demos, paid for by them. But then, the hand of bureaucracy said, probably quite rightly, hang on, we concentrate on one half of this act.
Right.
See you later. So I was on my own, but I'd started what became the first album, self-funded, the little bit of publishing money I had coming through, and naively I just assumed that 4AD would be, oh yeah, of course we'll put it out. So I was working with that in mind, because they did a lot of work with the Cocteau Twins at this Palladium Studios in Edinburgh, and I just thought, they're going to love this. Is the best album ever, which is quite a healthy way to approach projects. Really, you just believe it. Why would anyone say no to this? But towards the end of the project, I called Ivo Watts Russell at 4AD, and I had a lovely conversation. He made it very clear early on. He said, I don't want you to send me this tape, because even if it is the best album in the world, it's physically impossible. He was up to here with releases scheduled for the next 2 years. He said, it doesn't matter what you tell me, what I hear, I cannot. I was like, oh, okay. Bit slightly shell shocked, and whatever it was, 4 or 5 grand down the Swanee. But a Friends Again fan in London, lovely pal, said, look, this is crazy. I'll start touting the demos. And she ended up the career with Morris Agency PR or something. So she obviously had what it took as well. So amongst the people she got me to talk to was Andy McDonald at Go Discs.
Yes.
I think they dropped the demo in. They said, we've got to speak to this guy. So we went round, and there was Phil Jupitus, who was then known as Porky the Poet. He said,
I remember, yeah.
Andy McDonald's got to hear this. This is fantastic. It was a couple of songs. And sure enough, got back to Clapham, my digs in Clapham, and the phone rang. Andy McDonald, when can you come back in? And I was sort of signed to Go Discs within. It was amazingly easy getting into the deal, and amazingly easy getting chucked out of the deal just as the album came out. Unfortunately, they had some kind of big breakup with Chrysalis, who were the main sort of license partner, and he basically went on to form Independent Entity shortly after that. But I horribly fell between the cracks there. But we got the album out, and he financed the completion of the album and all that. So another interesting piece of the jigsaw.
And the band has kind of an interesting structure in a way, because there's been quite a lot of members over the years, a lot of collaboration. And is that the way that you've kind of preferred to work?
I think so. I think especially the older you get, there's no reason to have an absolutely fixed structure. I mean, there's some very important long-term collaborators, not least Hazel Morrison, a drummer and singer who just brings such a fantastic energy and talent to everything she does. We've got Callum McNair, who's been involved for quite a number of years. And then there's a nice crossover with Neil Clark, who was featured on the Lagoon Blues album, worked with him post Lloyd Cole and the Commotions. We did the Bloomsday thing together. So yeah, I think that's good. And obviously Liz Fraser coming in to do Sunpowder. Yeah, it seems to work. Doesn't seem to be any reason to get too fixed or too hung up about the band structure. And another lovely thing now that I'm working with my old friends again, buddy Paul McGeechan, on his Starless albums. That's a lovely kind of completion of the circle as well, where the guys that were at BBs together in primary school, and from that first band to suddenly be making music again, it's just that's. But why should that be formalized anyway?
Yeah, absolutely. Just a lot of bands, they're like Or maybe Friends Again were a bit like that, the last gang in town, that whole kind of Clash thing about, you know,
Yeah, I'm glad it did it. I think it yeah, it certainly suits yeah, it suits the teenage lifestyle more, I suppose. And yeah, I'm glad I had the band thing for all its ups and downs. I mean, it wasn't by no means all plain sailing. In fact, you know, the fact we broke up relatively early, you know, says it all, I suppose. But yeah, fantastic to have that experience. And it did take me a couple of years to adjust to, I suppose, that being essentially solo to begin with before long-term collaborators came on board. It did feed into a sense of, you know, me against the world. And the first couple of albums particularly were, you know, when James Grant was kind enough to come in and do some lovely backing vocals, Douglas McIntyre came in and did things on the first album. So there were people floating in even at that stage, but it felt, you know, there was no live band. I think Go Disc were keen for me to put a live band together, but it's tricky when they're not saying, well, okay, here's retainers for everyone. Here's the support. It costs a lot of money and there wasn't money flowing in. So how do you put a band together? It's difficult. And it sort of worked for me creatively to be that sense of isolation, I suppose, and been feeling slightly alienated from the scene. So it put me a bit outside a lot of what was going on in the 80s. Not that I didn't enjoy much. It was just I wasn't at the heart of the scene of the bands, the guys who stayed on as bands. You know, Love and Money, Hipsway. They were, you know, there was a band scene there which I definitely wasn't part of because I was no longer in a band as such.
And going back to the Marina Trilogy, actually, if you think about putting these albums on live, it's not that easy to do because they're really lush. There's strings and harmonies and all sorts of things going on. I didn't say I wouldn't imagine I'm going to tour this band easily.
Very true. But it's an exciting challenge. I mean, the plan was to do some serious gigs this year, you know, and really try and pull it off, get 6 or 8 string players in the whole bit and do it, you know. And to an extent, we're doing this live stream performance of the Kelvingrove Baby album end to end, and that's the first time we'll have, you know, played. Never mind end to end. There's certain songs that have never been played live, and there's a couple of challenging things in there. But you know, we've got a 7-piece band, no big string section, but we'll cover it, and hopefully we can do it justice.
So, is that sold out, so to speak, or is there?
Well, it's the beauty of the virtual world. There is no limit.
I just wondered.
It's sold enough.
Yeah,
it's sold enough to make sure the band all get paid, which is nice. Now we're just trying to make sure enough to the guy that's a professional studio, they're putting it together. So it'd be nice if they ended up covering, you know, the normal rates or something. So we're heading in the right direction. I think it's great for us as a bunch of musicians to actually be able to get together. It's quite a big space. It's big enough that you can do it safely and all the rest of it. But it'd be fantastic to. I mean, the rehearsals so far have been on Zoom.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, it's more a case of me listening in to the Edinburgh players in a room, and it was sounding great, but I was strumming along. But you've got that time delay when you're not in the same space. So now, really, really looking forward to it, and I think, yeah, whatever happens, I think if as long as we can pull it off musically, it'll absolutely have been worth doing. You know, there's a decent amount of people signed up to watch it, which is lovely.
So, if people are interested, how would they find out how to watch it?
Well, it's on the ticket website, Book It Be. Right. I don't know if that's bookitbe.com. If you just search the Bathers Kelvingrove Baby, failing that, you could go to the Bathers Facebook page, which I think is quite easy to get hold of. And just follow the link. Basically, I think you basically buy a link and the link will appear magically in your inbox on Saturday midday, and the concert begins at 8 o'clock on Saturday evening. So should be good. We actually get together to rehearse on Friday in the studio. So I'm cautiously confident and optimistic it'll be a really good one.
And you mentioned before we started recording that you've just had the most recent delivery of vinyl.
Yeah, I'm happy to report that had to go to a repressing of the 3 albums. So I was, it's one of those things. A whole bunch of cardboard boxes arrive, and you think, are these going to be sitting in the same space a year, 10 years from now? But I've got to say 10 out of 10 to Bandcamp as a way of artists directly connecting with an audience, because I was able to say, okay, we release it now, people are just buying it, getting it the next day in many cases direct from me. So it financially makes a huge difference. I think I could safely say these albums have now recouped, which they didn't necessarily do first time around, as we sort of went a bit over the top on the budget. But that's a nice feeling that it feels very direct. I like the sense of connection to, but to a certain extent, things like Bandcamp are helping to just make it easier for the artist to do their own thing.
That's right, and also buying direct from labels as well. I think that kind of that seems to be, people seem to be waking up to that, rather than, unfortunately, shops just don't carry the kind of stock that you would hope, I would think. Yeah, it's a shame. But there's some fantastic shops, Monorail and things. That's a whole it's a great, it's a great vibe in there, and there's a lot of really good meaty obscure stuff. I know that has a global reputation. Friends in America who seek that out when they come over. In fact, the guys in Marina, I love that shop. It's a good shop's a good shop, and there's a few of them around still, which is a wonderful thing. So, am I right in saying that 2001's Desire Regained was the last studio album you did? Yeah, you are. Bizarre as it seems, yes. That was and then I've continued to do a lot of music, mostly kind of writing and playing for my own interest. I tried to improve my piano. I tried to just kind of up my repertoire, as they would call it, just learning a few more classical pieces. And by doing that, you find your facility to try and achieve your own ideas becomes easier. And of course, in the course of that, you're always taking away, you kind of write a song. And fortunately for me, Paul McGeechan approached me for the Starless thing. He said, look, would you be interesting? I can't remember if he said interested in doing a vocal, but it very quickly became we were going to work on some songs together. And very happily, Misty Knights was using his first album. And we wrote another one called Spellbound for the recent Starless album, and revisited a song called Calvary from the Friends Again demos, which hadn't made the cut. We had to I think it was only at best half written, but we kept all the good bits, and I think it sounds great. It's taken a long time in the gestation, and been working on a new Bathers album. It was all set to go about 4 years ago, but I just decided it wasn't quite right, and went back to the drawing board, and now it is feeling quite right. I'm cautiously saying the best yet, as my family always teased me about that phrase, was everything's the best yet. As pizza's the best. But, you know what I mean? What you said earlier, you've got to believe that. You've got to believe that.
Absolutely. No, but I really do believe this is sounding, though I say so myself, I think it sounds fantastic. So I'm incredibly excited. My aim is to complete that by the recording side and mixing by Christmas, which it really means we could be looking at a release in the spring, an Easter time release, which would be a long time coming, but we'll get there.
Well, I mean, I think one of the side effects of the Marina Trilogy coming out and people discovering it or rediscovering it for themselves is there will be appetite for brand new material. So I can't wait to hear that.
Well, good. Glad to hear it. Yeah. I would like to say there's a master plan, and it might, with hindsight, it will probably look that way, hopefully. Sometimes the pieces just, you ride your luck. And certainly if I can achieve the goal of getting out next spring, there's definitely been a big revival of interest. And the Marina, it's just lovely to see that set of albums getting listened to again or reevaluated in the new edition. It's just, yeah, absolutely. It sets the scene very nicely for the new one.
Well, they're three of my favourite albums. I just adore them.
That's fantastic. Thank you.
Chris, thanks so much for talking to me today. It's been an absolute
pleasure, Alistair. Yeah, real joy.